If you're looking to stay informed with the latest analysis on the stories that are shaping our world in the areas of foreign policy, national security, and domestic politics, consider becoming a member of the DSR Network. With the DSR Network podcasts, stay ahead of the curve on global affairs. Each episode across our more than 10 shows features top experts, policymakers, and thought leaders who break down complex issues into digestible, engaging conversations. From breaking news to historical context, we cover the latest topics that matter most. Whether it's the intricacies of international diplomacy, the latest in national security strategies, or the dynamics of U.S. politics, the DSR Network has you covered. Members receive an ad-free listening experience, bonus content for virtually all of our shows, an invitation to join the DSR Slack community, enhanced show notes for select podcasts, and much more. Visit thedsrnetwork.com/buy and enter code JULY2024 to receive 50% off the regular membership price for the first year or first month. That's thedsrnetwork.com/buy and code JULY2024. Thank you very much for your support.
This is the Daily Blast from the New Republic, produced and presented by the DSR Network. I'm your host, Greg Sargent. This week, Donald Trump shared two images on social media that called for the jailing of Liz Cheney. Trump has been in a rage at Cheney for years, of course, but what was different this time is that one of the images he amplified called for her to be tried in a military tribunal. Which raises a question. What can Trump actually do to his political opponents if he wins back the White House and tries to unleash all the powers of the presidency on them? The answer, it turns out, is more complicated than you might expect, and it's perhaps even more disturbing, too. To sort this all out, we're talking to Christy Parker, counsel at the group Protect Democracy, who has spent a lot of time thinking about questions just like these. Really great to have you on today, Christy.
Thank you for having me.
So this new stuff from Trump is as ugly as it gets. He amplified one image that accused Liz Cheney of treason and called for her to be hauled before televised military tribunals. A second image featured images of Cheney again and members of the January 6th committee and even Republicans deemed insufficiently loyal to Trump, and the image called for them to go to jail instead of Steve Bannon. Now, Trump has been talking like this for a while, but the military tribunal thing is something new. I don't know how that would work, but to me, Christy, the broader point is that it suggests that he'll look for all kinds of ways to stretch his powers to target all these enemies. What's your reaction to this stuff?
We have every reason to believe, based on Trump's first term in office and the things he has said and done since then, to include violating court orders repeatedly while he has been a criminal defendant, that he will do everything he possibly can to push the envelope. So I don't think anybody should be in any doubt about that.
Axios is now reporting that Trump plans to nominate a trusted loyalist for Attorney General and even suggests this person can be counted on to use the Justice Department to target or even jail critics. Okay, so here's a question. If Trump ordered his DOJ to prosecute Liz Cheney or other members of the January 6th committee, Anthony Fauci, whoever he's hating on at the moment, with zero basis, he could potentially be in violation of the law himself, right? Some lawyers argue it would violate a federal law that makes it a crime for someone acting under color of law to willfully deprive a person of their constitutionally or legally protected rights. Can you talk about that provision and why Trump might be in violation of it if he corruptly targeted his enemies?
Sure, that's 18 U.S.C. Section 242. It's a Reconstruction era statute that's been in use for many, many years. I was a prosecutor in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, and I prosecuted people under that statute frequently. And what it does is it prevents anyone who's acting under color of law, which just simply means under state authority or federal authority, anyone acting under color of law from willfully violating the constitutional or statutory rights of another person. So what that statute does is it actually it's an enforcement mechanism for the Constitution. So the Constitution prohibits people from being prosecuted without due process of law, for instance, or having their liberty deprived without due process of law. It prevents unlawful, unreasonable searches and seizures, those sorts of things.
What sort of people did you prosecute for violating this statute?
So most typically law enforcement officers, state or federal law enforcement officers who were charged with enforcing the law either at the state or the federal level, who violated constitutional rights while doing so. So that would be something that you absolutely could look at to turn against, any federal official who willfully violated the Constitution in the course of carrying out their federal duties.
Federal official like Donald Trump. I think the next question is, would that be an impediment to Trump? I think it wouldn't be. Right now, as we speak, Trump's allies are drawing up lists of people who will be willing to carry out such prosecutions, and they want people who are absolutely committed to that. Listen to this from Steve Bannon speaking to Kash Patel, another MAGA celebrity who is expected to serve in the next Trump administration, courtesy of Media Matters.
Kash, I know you're probably going to be head of the CIA, but do you believe that you can deliver the goods on this in a pretty short order the first couple of months so we can get rolling on prosecutions?
Yes, we got the bench for it, Bannon, and you know those guys. I'm not going to go out there and say their names right now so the radical left-wing media can terrorize them.
So they're recruiting people to go all the way, Christy, and this is essential to making this work for them, right?
Absolutely. The foot soldiers who are willing to carry out Trump's unlawful orders are people who are going to be necessary for him to accomplish the things that he hopes to accomplish. Mr. Bannon, as somebody who is going to jail himself for doing the bidding of Donald Trump, should know, the people who carry out Trump's orders or attempt to should not feel confident that they are going to get anywhere close to the same sort of insulation from accountability that Trump is getting himself. The immunities that apply to the president do not apply to them. The lawyers who try to carry out Trump's work actually have to comply with the rules of the bars in the states where they are operating and where they are actually members. So they should not feel confident that they are going to escape liability just because Donald Trump does. So I think that is a major complication from the standpoint of his ability to carry out these claims that he's making. And that's in addition to just the law itself, which if you look at someone like the claims he's making against Liz Cheney, what law has she violated? The courts are still going to expect to see one. So from the standpoint of making any charge against her stick, that's a pretty serious problem.
Right. I think there are a couple of problems here. I'd like to work through them one by one. The first you raised there is that if they prosecute these people without cause, they won't be able to get an indictment. That's one of the impediments, and I think they could just sort of deal with that by just using law enforcement to harass these people, right? But the second point you raise is also really interesting about whether lawyers and others would be able to carry out Trump's directives. I think it's worth remembering that he really needs these people, right? Because in the last Trump administration, Trump kept running into roadblocks when officials at DOJ wouldn't carry out his corrupt targeting of enemies for him. He tried to target his enemies with DOJ before. As president, we've seen what this looks like. But now he's clearly realized that the law and the willingness of people internally to follow it was an impediment to him before. Now, you're saying it still will be, but can I ask, won't his appointees potentially be a lot more willing to break the law to carry out his targeting of enemies for two reasons? One, they're being recruited for this express purpose. They're true MAGA believers. And two, couldn't he preemptively pardon people to save them from legal liability?
So I think there is absolutely no doubt that there is a cadre of people who have spoken up and said, hey, yes, pick me. I will be happy to work in Trump's Justice Department. I will be happy to carry out the things that he is suggesting that he is going to do. So I do think that is a difference from the first time around is that he's got a ready-made set of people who have already given a lot of thought to wanting to join his Justice Department and to what they want to do, what plans they want to carry out when they do so. So there's no question about that. There's also no question about the fact that Trump will likely be more emboldened than he was the first time around, simply because he has escaped accountability so many times again, and because the Supreme Court has issued this decision broadly, although not completely, but, very broadly immunizing him for a lot of things that he might seek to do. The pardon power is a very dangerous power in the hands of someone like Donald Trump. There is absolutely no question about that. But again, when we're talking about the people who are going along with this, they're not the ones who have the pardon power. They're not the ones who've been given immunity from the Supreme Court. So, one, they would have to rely on Trump to actually follow through and pardon them. But beyond that does not relieve them of the obligations that they have either to their own state licensing authorities. You have to be a member of the bar to work for the Justice Department and to carry out the orders of the Attorney General. So that doesn't help them with their state bars. And it also might not help them avoid prosecution in state jurisdictions that have laws against things like, false arrest and false imprisonment and those sorts of things, because the pardon power doesn't apply to that. So again, I think we do need to be concerned about the kinds of people who would be willing to take up the mantle and go along with the things that he is talking about. Absolutely. But I think those people also need to think twice about what they might do, because they are not going to have the same protections that the president has. And I think there are going to be a lot of authorities out there who are going to be willing to enforce the rules against them. So again, they are really acting very much at their own risk, which is much more considerable than what their boss would be facing.
I will say that sure looks like there are a lot of people who are willing to go to jail for Donald Trump, though. Let me ask you about the Supreme Court. You just brought this up. The Supreme Court ruling that found that presidents have absolute immunity from prosecution for the exercise of core official powers of the presidency. One of those, as the ruling notes, is discussions with DOJ about decisions involving prosecutions. So just to be clear, even if corruptly ordering prosecutions does violate the law, as we discussed earlier, Trump would have absolute immunity from that in any case, right?
I mean, that is what the court appeared to say in its unprecedented decision yesterday, which, by the way, I will note, came as a shock in its breadth, even to, lifelong conservatives like Judge Michael Luttig, who have known the people on that court for a very long time. But yes, that they did single out, discussions between the president and people in the Department of Justice as part of the core powers of the presidency that, again, would afford immunity to him for things that he does and help him avoid personal liability. But again, I would just point out that does not apply. That does not apply to the foot soldiers, all of whom would be under an obligation to refuse to carry out unlawful orders, both to their state bars and to the United States Constitution.
Yeah, it's sort of a form of poetic justice to think that all of a sudden they could find themselves in the crosshairs if they follow this guy over the cliff. As far as I can tell, though, from the reporting that's out there, the potential targets of this kind of prosecution are taking this extremely seriously. There are people out there who are on these lists of, enemies of Trump. You basically know who they are. They're like lawyers who have been prominent critics of the administration, media figures who have prominently criticized the Trump administration, I should say. obviously the high ticket people like Liz Cheney and the members of the January 6th committee, but I think maybe even some staffers who work for some of these Democrats who were involved in targeting Trump and his allies. As far as I can tell, those people feel very vulnerable right now in a very real sense, and they're not treating this as a joke.
Well, it's definitely not a joke. There's no question about the fact that it is definitely not a joke. And as we've been saying throughout this conversation, people are right to take seriously the things that Trump says and to believe that he intends to do what he says he intends to do. And, there are written plans now of what he intends to do. There's a whole Project 2025 up on the Heritage Foundation's website that's a complete blueprint of things that he wants to do in addition to what he said. So everybody should be taking all of that extremely seriously and should be, letting other people know what they believe the stakes are of returning Donald Trump to the kind of power that he is seeking. So they are right to take it seriously. Absolutely, they are right. And again, all I can do is underscore the point that they would still, they're not without recourse. And the fact that, Trump might be permitted by voters to take the oath of office again on, January 20th, 2025, that doesn't mean at noon on January 20th, 2025, the rest of civil society is just going to stand down and, allow him to roll over people with these things. We still have laws. There's plenty of room in the law to, move to dismiss these sorts of baseless prosecutions. I think we have seen certainly at the district court level across the country, trial courts intervening to stop these sorts of things. Trump tried the first time around, for instance, to indict people like Andy McCabe and citizens on a grand jury. I think, based on the reporting, refused to go along with that and said, no, you have no probable cause for this. So it's going to take a village. It's going to take the people who serve on juries. It's going to take the judges who are legitimate judges who want to follow the law. But those are all still out there. And these truly are, these are baseless prosecutions, and they're not the sort that are hard to prove because Donald Trump has been out in public making a record of how much he hates these people and, his intentions to prosecute them for no reason other than his desire to retaliate.
I want to try to get a darker undercurrent of all this, which really speaks to the authoritarian nature of it. As you say, we have civil society. And by the way, I should remind everybody that during the first Trump administration, civil society was really quite robust and fighting back. And right now, in the same way that Trump and his allies are prepping for another level of war, so too is civil society doing the same thing right now. Prepping in response to the clear telegraphing of what's coming from Trump and his allies. I do think, though, we should mention this. A lot of this is really psychological warfare, psyops, right? It's a hallmark of authoritarian politics to try to frighten everyone into thinking that their triumph is inevitable, that they're invulnerable, they're invincible, they're irresistible, their power. And so when Bannon and Kash Patel kind of thump their chests all about how they have a deep bench full of people ready to break the law for Trump. When Trump posts images of, deranged supporters talking about hauling Liz Cheney before military tribunals and stuff, without in any way minimizing the seriousness of it, I think a big part of it is to try to get liberals and civically concerned people to kind of enter into a form of despair and almost demobilize. I mean, you've thought a lot about authoritarian politics. Does that sound right to you?
I mean, it does. And I think I'm sure, we're both well familiar with the work of Professor Timothy Snyder, and in his extremely indispensable On Tyranny tract. I think one of the first things in it talks about don't obey in advance. don't just knuckle under and concede because you believe that they have the power that they say that they have. Don't go out and act in accordance with what you think they're going to make you do before they have ever actually done it. So and that is all based on the idea that, yes, what authoritarians seek to do is to scare people, to terrorize people, to create a chilling effect on people who feel like they're afraid to speak out. So I think all of that is absolutely correct, and a thing that is something to be concerned about, because all of these things are worrying. They are scary. Whenever the most powerful person, in the most powerful country in the world threatens people and has an army of people who, show up to at least, verbally carry out his harassment, if not in other ways, that's a thing to be taken seriously. But I think you're exactly right that we also have to look to all of the people who were able to just stand up and say no the first time around. And that's people from inside the federal government, lawyers and professionals and people who are kind of used to standing up for themselves and used to standing up on behalf of large entities, but also just regular people. We've seen it all over the country. We've seen it in the people who are like saying, no, you're not going to ban me from reading a book, or no, you're not going to ban me from talking about who my spouse is if I don't happen to be heterosexual. You're just not going to do these things to me, and we are not going to accept your efforts to restrain our liberty and our speech. This is still the United States of America. We've been falling down, I think, on civics education, but I do think, people are still well versed in the belief that Americans are supposed to be free. We're supposed to have liberty. We're supposed to have free speech. So when somebody comes in and tries to stop that, I think there's actually also a lot of conditioning in people to stand up and say, no, you can't do that. And we've seen people do that. We've seen people fight back against Rudy Giuliani. We've seen them fight back against Steve Bannon. We saw them fight back against Donald Trump. So we shouldn't fail to see the successes that those folks have had in stopping these people from doing the things that they most want to do.
Really well said, Christy Parker. We're so glad you came on with us today. You're going to have a lot of work to do in a second Trump administration, I'll tell you that.
Well, let's, I hope people understand the stakes before we get to that point. But we'll be here. We're not going anywhere.
Great to hear. Thanks again, Christy. Everybody, make sure to check out some new content we have up at TNR.com. Tom Hartman explaining how the next step for Trump is to end all the prosecutions of him, and Parker Malloy asking why the media keeps helping Steve Bannon act the part of martyr. We'll see you all tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Daily Blast with me, your host, Greg Sargent. The Daily Blast is a New Republic podcast and is produced by Riley Fessler on the DSR Network.